Alex had spent years spelunking, exploring some of the most dangerous and remote caves around the world. However, none intrigued him as much as the rumored Whispering Cave in the distant mountains. Locals spoke of the cave in hushed tones, sharing eerie tales of people entering and never returning. They claimed that the cave whispered secrets to those brave enough, or foolish enough, to venture inside, slowly driving them to madness. Most dismissed it as legend, a story meant to keep thrill-seekers away from dangerous underground passages. But Alex wasn't one to be deterred by ghost stories. Armed with his gear and an insatiable curiosity, he set out to find the cave. His journey led him through dense forests and up rocky trails until he finally stood before the cave's entrance. It was massive, its dark mouth looming before him, framed by jagged rocks. The air around it was cold, sending a chill down his spine. Ignoring the unease settling in his stomach, Alex switched on his headlamp and stepped inside. The air grew colder, carrying a faint, earthy scent. The first tunnel was narrow and damp, forcing him to stoop as he navigated through the darkness. As he moved deeper, the outside world faded, replaced by the echoing sounds of dripping water and his own footsteps. It was silent except for the occasional drip of water from the ceiling. And then, as he took another step, he heard it, a soft whisper, barely audible, like wind passing through the tunnels. He stopped, straining to listen. The whisper was faint, but unmistakably there, reverberating through the cave walls. It seemed to come from all directions at once, surrounding him in a disorienting hum. Alex shook his head, trying to ignore it, chalking it up to the acoustics of the cave. But the sound lingered, growing louder the deeper he went. The cave twisted and turned, a labyrinth of tunnels that branched off in every direction. Alex marked his path with chalk, ensuring he could find his way back. However, with each step, the whispers grew more distinct. They weren't random sounds anymore. They were voices, clear and purposeful. They seemed to know him, calling his name softly from the shadows. "Alex, you shouldn't be here," the voice murmured, sending a shiver down his spine. He paused, his heart pounding. It was his own name, spoken in a tone that was both familiar and alien. He turned in a circle, shining his flashlight into the darkness, searching for any sign of someone, or something, following him. But he was alone. Ignoring the growing fear, he continued deeper into the cave. The whispers followed, sometimes sounding as though they were right beside his ear, other times echoing from the tunnels ahead. The cave grew colder, and a dampness settled in the air, clinging to his skin. "Turn back before it's too late," the voices hissed. Alex gritted his teeth, pushing forward. The cave seemed to pulse around him, the walls closing in as the whispers rose to a cacophony. His breath came in ragged gasps as he navigated the twisting passages, the sound of his own heartbeat drowning out the voices for a brief moment. Then, as abruptly as they had begun, the whispers fell silent, leaving only the echo of his footsteps in the darkness. Relieved by the sudden silence, Alex took a moment to catch his breath. He had ventured deep into caves before, but this one felt different. There was a malevolence here, something far beyond the natural dangers of the underground. As he continued forward, he entered a larger chamber. His flashlight beam swept across the cavern walls, revealing strange markings etched into the stone. Symbols and shapes, unlike anything he had seen before, spiraled across the walls in a chaotic pattern. He approached the wall, running his gloved fingers over the carvings. They felt smooth, as if worn down by centuries of erosion or something else. As he examined them, a familiar whisper filled the air. But this time, it wasn't just a murmur. It was a full sentence spoken in his own voice. "You will be lost, just like the others." A chill ran through him. The words echoed in his mind, stirring memories he had long buried. Memories of the times he had gotten lost in other caves, of the panic and fear that had gripped him. The cave was toying with him, using his own fears against him. He backed away from the wall, his heart pounding. It felt like the cave was alive, reading his thoughts and twisting them into whispers that filled the darkness. He turned his flashlight toward the opposite wall, and his breath caught in his throat. There, Faintly visible in the dim light were names scratched into the stone. Hundreds of names, each one etched with the same desperate, shaky hand. His own name was among them, freshly carved as if by some unseen force. Panic surged within him. He needed to leave. Alex stumbled back from the wall, his heart racing. The sight of his own name etched among the countless others sent a shock of terror through him. For the first time, he felt a surge of true fear, the kind that claws at the edges of your mind, urging you to flee. He spun around, aiming his flashlight down the tunnel he had come from. His chalk marks were gone. The whispers resumed, but they were different now. They no longer called his name, but instead spoke in low, mocking tones. Lost? So lost. They hissed, slithering through the air like an unseen serpent. Alex gripped his flashlight tighter and forced himself to move forward. He had to find his way out. Panic wouldn't help him now. He needed to stay focused. As he ventured deeper into the cave, the passages grew narrower, twisting in unnatural ways. The walls seemed to pulse, closing in around him. The air was thick and humid, carrying a metallic scent that turned his stomach. His breathing echoed loudly in the confined space, a stark reminder of how far underground he was. The whispers grew louder, overlapping until they became a cacophony that drowned out his thoughts. He pressed his hands to his ears, trying to block out the sound, but it was useless. The voices were inside his head. The ground suddenly gave way beneath him, and he slid down a steep slope, tumbling through the darkness. His flashlight flew from his grip, clattering against the rocks as he fell. He landed with a thud in a large chamber. The wind knocked out of him. Pain shot through his limbs, and he gasped for breath, struggling to get his bearings. Gritting his teeth, Alex pushed himself up, his body aching from the fall. He looked around the chamber, searching for his flashlight. It lay a few feet away, the beam flickering weakly. He crawled toward it and picked it up, shining the light around the room. What he saw made his blood run cold. The chamber was vast, its walls lined with what looked like statues carved from the stone. But as he moved the beam across them, he realized they weren't statues. They were figures, frozen in twisted poses, their faces contorted in expressions of fear and agony. Each one appeared to be made of stone, yet there was a hauntingly lifelike quality to them, as if they had been petrified while alive. He approached one of the figures, a man with his hands raised as if to ward off something unseen. The detail was horrifying. The fear etched into every crease of the man's face, the texture of his clothing preserved perfectly. Alex's stomach churned. Could these be the people who had entered the cave before him? Had they been transformed into stone by some dark force? The whispers grew louder, swirling around him. Trapped, trapped, forever. They chanted, rising to a crescendo that made his head throb. The figures seemed to shift in the flickering light, their eyes following his movements. He staggered back, his breath quickening. He had to get out of here. He had to escape before the cave claimed him as it had the others. Alex stumbled through a narrow passage, leaving the chamber of petrified figures behind. The whispers continued, filling his mind with disorienting thoughts and fragments of memories that weren't his own. It was as if the cave was sifting through his psyche, searching for his deepest fears to use against him. The tunnel twisted and turned, leading him deeper into the darkness. His flashlight's beam wavered, casting distorted shadows that seemed to writhe along the walls. The cave felt alive, shifting and changing with each step he took. The air grew colder, and he could feel a sense of malevolence pressing down on him, as if the cave itself were watching, waiting for him to succumb. He emerged into another chamber, smaller than the last but equally unnerving. At the center was a pool of water, dark and still. His reflection stared back at him from the surface, but as he watched, it began to change. His face twisted into a grotesque mockery, eyes wide with terror, mouth stretched into a silent scream. The whispers intensified, echoing around the chamber, repeating his own thoughts and fears back to him. "You can't escape. You belong to the cave now," they hissed. Alex stepped back, the words striking him like a blow. He shook his head, fighting against the panic that threatened to overwhelm him. No, He muttered to himself, clenching his fists. I will get out of here. Turning away from the pool, Alex pushed onward, forcing himself through another narrow passage. The cave seemed to stretch endlessly, each turn leading to another tunnel, each chamber filled with its own horrors. He stumbled upon a long corridor, the walls smooth and reflective like polished stone. As he walked, he heard faint echoes, his own footsteps, his own breathing. But then the echoes changed. They became voices, whispering secrets and regrets he had buried long ago. They taunted him, revealing moments of his past that filled him with shame and fear. Remember when you failed? Remember when you ran away? They chanted, the corridor amplifying the words until they became an overwhelming roar. He stopped, pressing his hands to his ears, but the voices persisted, growing louder. His reflection on the polished stone walls twisted and distorted, morphing into different versions of himself, each one more grotesque and warped than the last. It was like staring into a mirror that showed not his appearance, but his inner demons. No, this isn't real, he shouted, his voice echoing down the corridor. The reflections flickered, and for a brief moment, the whispers faltered. Grasping at that sliver of hope, Alex forced himself to move forward. The corridor stretched on, the walls narrowing until he was almost squeezing through. Finally, he stumbled into a cavern that was vast and hollow, unlike any other he had encountered in the cave. The air inside was thick and cold, sending a shiver through his body. The cavern walls glistened faintly, covered in a substance that resembled ice but pulsed with an eerie blue light. In the center of the cavern stood a massive stone pedestal. Upon it lay an object that caught his attention, a cracked, ancient-looking mirror framed in intricate carvings. The whispers grew to a deafening chorus, echoing around the cavern. As Alex approached the pedestal, the light around the mirror grew brighter, illuminating the space with an unsettling glow. His reflection in the mirror shifted and warped, showing different versions of himself, fearful, angry, despairing. It was as if the mirror was reflecting every dark thought and fear he had ever harbored. The voice from earlier returned, deep and rumbling, seeming to come from both within the cavern and inside his mind. Look at yourself. Alex, you are nothing. You cannot escape. You belong to us now. He stepped back, his heart racing. The mirror wasn't just a simple object. It was a manifestation of the cave's will, an anchor for its dark power. The cave wanted him to give in, to succumb to his own fear and despair. If he allowed it, he would become another prisoner within its depths, just like the others before him. No, he muttered, clenching his fists. He wasn't going to give up. The cave fed on fear and hopelessness, but he still had a choice. He looked around the cavern, searching for a way out. The pedestal seemed to be the focus of the cave's power, but there had to be another way. Suddenly, he remembered the carvings he had seen earlier in the cave, the symbols etched into the walls. They hadn't been random. They were warnings, guides left by others who had come before him. Maybe, just maybe, they held the key to disrupting the cave's influence. Determined, Alex approached the pedestal again, focusing on the symbols around the mirror's frame. He reached out, tracing the carvings with his fingers. As he did, the cavern began to tremble, and the whispers grew more frantic. No, stop, they hissed, their tone shifting from mocking to furious. The cave was reacting, fighting back as he tried to break its hold. The mirror's light flared, almost blinding him. Images flickered across its surface, visions of people trapped in stone, endless tunnels spiraling into darkness, and his own reflection twisting in agony. He felt the cave's will pushing against him, trying to force him to look into the mirror and accept his fate. Alex resisted, closing his eyes. This isn't real, he shouted, grounding himself in his own thoughts. You don't control me. He reached out blindly, feeling for the frame of the mirror. His hand closed around it, and he pulled with all his strength. The mirror shattered, sending shards flying through the cavern. The light pulsed violently, and a shockwave knocked him to the ground. The whispers became a wail, a cacophony of voices screaming in rage and pain. For a moment, the entire cavern seemed to collapse around him, the darkness pressing in from all sides. When the darkness lifted, Alex found himself lying on the cold stone floor, gasping for breath. The cavern was silent, the eerie blue light gone. He looked around, his head pounding, and saw that the mirror was nothing more than a pile of shattered glass. The carvings on the walls had faded, leaving the stones smooth and unmarked. He forced himself to stand, his legs shaking. The cave had grown quiet, its power seemingly broken. The whispers had ceased, replaced by an empty stillness that filled the air. He picked up his flashlight, which had miraculously survived the chaos, and shined it around the cavern. There, on the far wall, was an opening, a tunnel that led upward. With renewed hope, he stumbled toward the exit, his heart pounding in his chest. The path was steep and treacherous, but he climbed, the thought of freedom driving him forward. The tunnel grew narrower, the air fresher with each step. Finally, he saw it, a faint glimmer of daylight. He emerged into the open air, collapsing onto the rocky ground outside the cave. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the landscape. For a moment, he just lay there, breathing in the cool, fresh air. He had escaped. The cave had tried to consume him, but he had fought back and won. As he sat up, he glanced back at the cave's entrance. It was silent now, the darkness within no longer whispering its dreadful secrets. Yet, he knew that its malevolence still lingered, waiting for the next soul to wander into its depths. He stood up, his body aching but his resolve firm. He had survived, but the experience had changed him. The cave had shown him the power of his own fears, and he had faced them. If this harrowing journey into the Whispering Cave left you gripping your seat, don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales of the unknown. Share your thoughts. What would you do if a cave whispered your secrets? Give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed the suspense, and remember, not every darkness is meant to be explored.